If you're struggling with large groups of athletes of 10, 20, even 30 athletes at once, you are playing a game of chaos management. You're not trying to be as specific as you possibly can for each athlete. Really, you're trying to manage chaos, manage the flow of the weight room, and manage how well you're able to coach certain things, because there's a lot of different challenges that this poses. You're going to have athletes who are playing different sports. You're going to have athletes who are at different skill levels. You're going to have athletes that are coming into the weight room at a differing frequency from one another. So you might have one athlete coming in 4 days a week, and another athlete you might see 2 times. There's other athletes you might just see once. It depends on their schedule and what their lifestyle and what their sporting situation is affording them to do. Okay, so in this video, I'm going to talk about how I would approach this problem. And this is something that I face every single day, training teams over 20 athletes at once. And I'm answering a question from somebody in my mentorship program. His name is Deshaun, and he trains high school athletes in the private sector, and he has groups over 30 athletes. And Deshaun says, the biggest thing for my programming is, number one, I program primarily for big groups of athletes, up to 10 to 30 athletes. I've got plenty of equipment, but time is an element for me. Okay, that's another big one. Number two, most of my programming is for my high school sessions here at my private facility. So our athletes' training frequency changes with the time of year, and I have different athletes of different sports on different schedules. I'd love a video explaining programming for large groups of what I'd call comprehensive sports performance. So comprehensive sports performance, to me, that's a program that you're going to implement, and it's like a minimal viable program that you're able to implement on a large scale. So you're able to put athletes through it regardless of their unique context. Okay, and this is going to help us do a couple of really important things for us as a coach that I'm going to get into here. So the number one thing that you want to do is acknowledge the things that you don't want to happen. You don't want numerous programs running at once, and you also don't want a ton of different equipment to set up at once. If you can minimize how spread out people are, how segregated different groups are within the weight room, this is going to help your ability to have more eyes on your athletes and to keep things more organized. You also don't want to be in a situation where you have to demo 3 to 4 or 5 different exercises at once based on the programs that you've chosen to implement. So we're going to talk about narrowing down your buckets that you're going to program for to encapsulate more athletes at once into these different buckets. The more you have to worry about moving parts, the more things are going to get complicated, the more time you're going to spend not coaching, and you're going to be worried about what people are doing, if they're doing things correctly, if they're in the right place, and things are going to go wrong. So we need to control for how many moving parts there are, and to avoid these problems, you want to try to keep an overall structure, number one. Okay, so that's going to start with standardizing your warm-up. You don't need different warm-ups for different sports. If everyone is on the line at minute 0, do the same warm-up. Keep it standard. Now, when it comes to structure in the actual session, there's a couple ways you can go about doing this. The first way that I think this is going to be organized the best is by having a natural flow of your training blocks. So if you have like a primary block, you have a secondary block, then you have a tertiary block, make the flow of every single block standard. So regardless of what program that you're running, you're going to have, say, a heavy bilateral lift, then you're going to do a plyometric or a jump, and then you're going to do a mobility section. Within that, this is the second layer to this. If you can keep exercises fairly the same, or the equipment that's needed for certain exercises fairly the same, you're only going to have to worry about how that exercise is executed. So across the board, the means that we're going to use to actually train these athletes and elicit the adaptations that we want to give them, that's not going to change so much. For instance, if I were an in-season athlete, I might still back squat, I might still bench press, I might still do plyometrics, but the parameters around those things are going to change. Maybe I don't do an eccentric tempo if I'm in season. Maybe I don't do an isometric hold at the bottom. Maybe I use a VBT device in the in-season period to stay above a certain velocity threshold. Now, Deshaun, thankfully, has this VBT device, so we could use that to our advantage later on when we get into actually programming. So if you can keep the exercises the same, and then within that create layers of complexity as to how it's going to be executed. So a more specific instance is for an off-season athlete, let's say you're in an eccentric block with your off-season athletes. You're going to instill a 5 to 6 second tempo, and you're going to do 4 sets of 2 to 3 reps, for example. But then your in-season group, you're going to take away that tempo, and you're going to do 4 sets of 3 at 0.7 meters per second, for example. So that's a more specific representation of changing execution. So everyone's in one place. They're running the same program, but you're changing the parameters around it and how you're actually choosing to load the exercise. An even more foundational component to this, and this is probably where you should begin before you get to the actual exercise selection, is your basic needs analysis. So when we do a needs analysis, we're usually asking questions like, what's the population that we're working with? And in this case, it's high school. What does this population need to excel and develop? And what sport do they play? Now, in this situation, with this many athletes, with this many sports, okay, you're going to have volleyball, baseball, softball, track and field, basketball, soccer. You could have wrestling. There's going to be a lot of differences in that regard. And if you approach your programming by sport, you're going to have way too many programs and there's going to be way too many moving parts. You want to consolidate these things not into what the athletes play, not their sport, but what they need from a physical perspective. Okay, so what's the training adaptation that we want to get for these athletes? And that brings me to tiers, right? So you're going to have your foundational group, then you could have an intermediate, and then you could have an advanced. Or maybe there's not that much of a separation between your athletes to where you need 3 levels. Maybe you just need an intro and then an intermediate. Or you could call that intermediate group the advanced group. So now you just have 2. So it depends on how wide or how broad of a range of athlete skill levels you're working with. But that's another major suggestion, is to get past sport specificity, because at the end of the day, no matter what sport you play, you're going to use similar means. I could be a football wide receiver. I could be a baseball pitcher. I could be an offensive lineman. I could be a wrestler. I might still squat. I might still jump. I might still do Olympic lifts. Okay, the means are not going to change that much. So if we can get past sport specificity and instead take the approach of, okay, I want to get my athletes to be as forceful and robust in as many different contexts as I possibly can. I'm going to broaden their movement bag, get them to excel at as many skills as I possibly can. This is going to be more beneficial for their development than training them in a specific way. My approach, and I have a lot of details to add to this, but this is not that's not the topic of conversation for this video, is sport practice. That's where they're getting their specificity, especially if we're dealing with in-season athletes. You don't need to get hyper-specific and think about their sport so much. You need to maintain physical qualities, continue to push physical qualities, and that's pretty much it. You don't have to worry about what their sport demands because their sport is giving them that already. It's not like only baseball players are going to do direct shoulder care work. A football player can do that. It's actually going to help their lifts. You know, if you do direct shoulder care work, that's going to help them be healthy. It's going to help them progress their weights faster, probably. It's going to keep them free from injury. So you're going to deliver the same stimulus to all these athletes because it's good for them. It might not be specific to their actual game demands, but it's healthy for them to incorporate so that they can continue to excel in training and not get hurt and be more well-rounded. Okay, it's not like a volleyball player or basketball player are the only 2 populations that should be doing approach jumps. Approach jumps are a great jumping exercise to do for any athletic population that wants to develop lower body explosiveness. So besides the exercise selection and putting people in one place and trying to manipulate those constraints around how you're going to actually program, we can talk about frequency now. So you can have an in-season and an off-season program and then go based off of how often people are going to be coming into the weight room. What I would do is start with your off-season program because you're going to have more days to work with and you're going to be able to fit more stuff in. Then you're going to take that same program and you're going to create an in-season version of it. So in my case, I might take a 4-day program and cut it down to just 2 days. And when you do this, you want to look at your most essential programming aspects. What are the most essential elements of that 4-day program? Once you have that, now you can narrow down. So you're going to isolate those factors and you're going to consolidate them into 2 days. That's the most important thing above everything else that you're going to do, because you want to keep your meat and potatoes in the program. You don't want to be scrambling to fit a bunch of stuff in. Like I said before, you want to create a minimal viable program. What do we have to get done given the time that we've been allotted here? So let's say we have a training day where you have off-season athletes and in-season athletes in the weight room at the same time. Probably the most important variable that you want to control for is going to be your volume, because you want to keep intensity fairly high at times during the in-season period to continue to push adaptation, to not lose the benefits that you've gotten from the off-season, and volume is going to have to be trimmed. So on your actual program, you're going to have similar exercises, but then you're just going to black out maybe the last set. So I use Excel, right? So if I had an off-season athlete doing 5 sets of 4 at 75 or 80%, I'm just spitballing numbers, and I had an in-season athlete working with them at the same exact time, I'm just going to have that in-season athlete do 1 less set. Or they can keep the same amount of sets, and I'm just going to do 3 reps with them, or 2 reps. Okay, there's a couple ways you can go about that, and one way is color coding. So if you wanted one sheet, you're going to have different tiers of things that you want to do on there. If you pick the exercise, let's say it's trap bar deadlift. Underneath that, you're going to have your sets and reps. So you could have your set number picked out already, and then on the rep side, you could have a number written in blue, and you could have a number written in red. And this is going to denote what the athlete should do based on what situation they're in. So at the top of your sheet, you might have, hey, if you are in season, then refer to the blue number. If you're in off season, refer to the red number. So now you've kind of tailored one sheet to multiple different subsets of the groups that you're working with. This also applies to exercise selection to begin with. So if you have foundation athletes and intermediate/advanced athletes, if you get down to your secondary block and you have, barbell RDL, but then you have foundation athletes who don't know how to hinge, or maybe they're not strong enough to do a barbell RDL, you could write barbell RDL or XYZ, whatever exercise that you want to do for that group. Okay, so now you're not printing out a million sheets, right? That's one thing we're trying to consolidate here, is how many things you have to look at, and reducing the amount of friction that your athletes have to deal with too, so that they kind of understand what's going on. If I had barbell RDL, but people that aren't strong enough to do barbell yet, I'm gonna write /dumbbell RDL. If I had dumbbell bench press, but I have athletes that can't do a proper push-up yet, I'm gonna write dumbbell bench press / hand pickup push-up, or whatever variation that they're comfortable doing. So to summarize, this is how I would start and where I would go, just sitting down and writing these programs from the jump. Because we know a couple things, right? Volume is going to be the number one thing you want to control for in season, and so is frequency. But the target adaptation is going to reign supreme. So I would start my programs by category of what the athletes need. Is it learning movements? Is it foundational training? Is it developing maximal strength? Is it developing lean mass? Is it developing better power expression or speed strength? So narrow down your categories of athletes. After that, the in-season versus off-season disparity and programming differences are not that crazy different. The main difference is going to be your volume dose and the frequency of the training, because you want to keep intensity high in season like we talked about, because you are trying to continue to get better, and you're also trying to maintain the qualities that you've built in the off season. So the umbrella is going to be your qualities. Below that, you're going to have in-season versus off-season, and then on your actual sheet is where you're going to create the difference between those different skill levels of athletes. Maximal strength focus, lean mass focus, whatever physical quality that you're trying to pursue. And then beneath that, you're going to have in-season versus off-season dosages. And then within that, you're going to have the skill levels of the athletes, movement regressions and progressions. You can have 3 exercises in each box. You could have 2. My recommendation is to keep it as little as you can to, again, maintain fluidity in the session, reduce the chaos on the floor, try to make it as simple as possible so that your athletes aren't confused and you're not ripping your head off trying to accommodate for all these differences that you're experiencing. So I hope that helps. Leave some comments. Be happy to talk to you more about this particular topic, and I'll see you next time.